disk quotas. You know, it doesn't matter how big hard disks grow to nowadays, there's always another version of Microsoft Office around to fill it up. Well, okay, Office really isn't that big, but whilst hard disks are growing ever larger in capacity, along comes the next killer app like video, and I say that, of course, as you're watching a video, along comes larger files to fill up any hard disks that you have. In a corporate environment especially, managing disk space is critical since so many other factors depend on it. For a start, Windows itself is going to die a horrible death if there's not enough disk space to go around. Try it. Let it run out of disk space and see how it handles it. See how Exchange Server or SQL Server work when the disk is full. From a backup perspective, controlling disk space is also important since the amount of data you need to back up will affect what type of backup you use. Sometimes there's just not enough time in a day to back up all of your data to tapes. There's so many problems that can be had by just leaving people to idly fill up your server's hard disks. Now there needs to be a better way of managing what disk space users are allowed to use, and thankfully there is. In Windows 2008, we can use disk quotas to set hard storage limits against our users. When we enable disk quotas on a Windows server, it's the quota manager that tracks files owned by users on a volume, and then it compares the user's allowed disk usage against their actual disk space usage. And when the user is getting close to their allowed disk space limit, it's going to notify the user to delete any unneeded files or risk being denied the ability to save any more files if their actual limit is reached. So to configure quotas, you must first ensure that the drive you wish to configure quotas on is formatted with the NTFS file system, which is unlikely that your drives won't be formatted with NTFS nowadays, but it's worth mentioning since NTFS is a requirement. So there's two ways we can configure quotas. We can use Windows Explorer and right-click on a drive and choose Properties, and then the Quota tab. Alternatively, we could use the Disk Management Console by first firing up the Server Manager, and then expanding Storage, and selecting Disk Management, and we can configure our quotas from here. Personally, I recommend becoming accustomed to using this Disk Management Console rather than using Windows Explorer when you manage your disk quotas, and there's a really good reason behind that. In Windows Explorer, you're only able to see disk quotas that are enabled for drives that you've assigned a drive letter. But what about if you want to assign quotas for mounted volumes? Now that's why I recommend using this Disk Management Console instead, as it allows us to see all these mount points. Alright, well, to enable quotas here in the Disk Management Console, we're going to right-click on a volume and select Properties. And again, we're going to choose the Quotas tab, and then we'll enable Quota Management. Now, since we've only just now enabled quotas, the default settings at this stage are not restricting any users to any amount of disk space. So the first option we have here is to deny any more disk space to users that exceed their quota limit. Probably a good idea to check this, unless of course you only want to warn users that they're using too much disk space. In fact, I actually did some work with a company a while back that had a service level agreement with another company to manage their file servers, and in that agreement they'd agreed to allow unlimited disk space. Whoa, bad idea. The funny thing is though, they did use quotas to try and convince users to stay within a fixed amount of disk space, but they couldn't check this box here and stop users when they'd used too much. Instead, they had to suck it up and try to find other ways of getting more disk space. Things like compressing data and adding more disks, and eventually it got to the stage where there was just simply too many problems being caused by the lack of available disk space. So this is why I stress the importance of working to actively monitor and control the amount of disk space that you're using. That way, as an administrator, you can know exactly how many backup tapes you need, exactly how long it's going to take to require a hard disk upgrade, and so forth. So anyway, should this box be checked? Well, if it's up to me, I think you know my answer there. Absolutely it should. I do believe in controlling my own environment, and not letting it control me. So therefore, I'd check it, and if users can't deal with the amount of storage space that they've been granted, well, they can ask for more, providing they give me a good reason. Or they could archive any old data to a DVD or just delete it if it's really no longer required. And you guys are administrators, you'd know that most of it, especially the larger stuff like movies and applications, that stuff, that can be easily archived and then removed. But before you head off and implement these quotas, this box here is one of those things that you better be sure before you check it. Now if we do check this box, then we'll also want to limit disk space to a certain amount, since there's really no point denying users more space if you aren't limiting their disk usage. So we're going to limit our disk space to say 1 gig, and I'm going to set a warning level here to 800 megabytes. So I think we're being pretty fair here. Each user is able to use 1 gig of space on this server, on this C drive, this disk that is. Once they've hit 800 meg of data, we're going to warn them via a pop-up message box when they try to save more data that they're getting close to their limit. That way, they're not hit with a brick wall later on. They'll have had plenty of advance notice that they're getting close to that wall, and they'll know that they're going to have problems if they continue dumping lots of new data on this drive. Our final options at the bottom here are to generate event log messages when a user exceeds either their quota limit, which of course is 1 gig, and we can also log an event to our event log when a user exceeds their warning level, which I've set to 800 meg. Now we have the option above here to set default values for any new users on this drive, but we can also limit disk space by username as well, and this can be useful when the CEO comes down and tells you that he wants more than 1 gig. Since you probably value your job, you'll want to give him or her more disk space, but you don't want to change it for everyone, so we're going to click on the Quota Entries button, and this will bring up a list containing individual quota entries. Now by default, there's only one entry in the list here, which you can see that if I expand this logon name column, this belongs to the built-in administrator, and you can see the quota limit is set to unlimited. And there's a good reason that the administrator's account is set to unlimited, as this enables the administrator to install software and patches and services and data and things like that without exceeding their quota. Because what happens is, if me as the administrator was to install, say, Microsoft Office on this server, the complete installation is going to be well over 1 gig. If I'd set the limit to 1 gig, what does that do to my quota? Well, it blows it away, since that installation of Microsoft Office was done under my username, therefore it counts towards my quota. So here's another example of where administrators are special people, and you'll do well to leave this setting alone. But for the sake of the argument, let's assume that this entry here was for our CEO. To modify his quota properties, we'd select the entry here, and we'll right click, and we'll choose Properties. And from here, we're able to change quota properties for this account only. So we could set his quota to unlimited if we like, which it currently is set to, or we could impose different values from the ones that we specified earlier for new users. Now one other thing we can do here is firstly cancel this, and up at the top here we'll click on this new icon and create a new quota, and this will bring up the select user account dialog box where we can go and query Active Directory for a specific user. So I'm going to type in Lucas and hit check names, and that'll find the Lucas account that I've created in an earlier video, so I'm going to click OK here. And now we're able to set a specific quota limit just for Lucas. So we can limit disk space here for Lucas, and like before, we can set specific values only for him. So let's set his limit here to 500 meg, and we're going to give him a warning once he hits 400 meg. So now we've got a totally different set of rules for Lucas, and unfortunately for him, he's got half the disk space of other people on this server. Now remember, if we had a D drive or an E drive on this server as well, and we also wanted to include those disks in our quota management, then we'd need to follow exactly the same process as we've done here for any additional drives. But to make things a little easier, you can select a whole bunch of these quota entries from this list, and then right click and then choose to export the quota entries. And then we can simply move over to the new drive, and up the top here we'll choose the quota menu, and then we can import those entries to the new drive. That way you only have to build your customized quota list once and then import it to the new drive. So that's pretty logical there. And that's disk quotas. There's really not much to them at all, but they can be extremely effective in helping you manage your disk space. Sometimes the simple things in life are truly the best, and when it comes time to implement disk quotas, it really doesn't get much easier than this. We hope you've enjoyed this video and would like to thank you for watching.